Tobacco companies have seduced generations with the allure of their deadly product and use any device they can to attract new customers.
They have a track record of not being trustworthy. They've twisted the evidence in the past, they've tried to consistently undermine policy, and most importantly, they continue to try and maximize profits.
Now there's a new product, electronic or e-cigarettes, that the industry hopes will rebrand its image. We've been given rare access to BAT, the world's second largest tobacco company, which says it's now committed to harm reduction by developing safer products.
E-cigarettes and tobacco harm reduction is central to BAT's strategy. It's far from a PR stunt. It's a very, very clear commercial intent. It's the right thing to do for society.
But some health campaigners see e-cigarettes as a cynical smokescreen.
I think they will use e-cigarettes to present a more benign face to the public, and they will use it as a marketing tool to advance their core business, which is selling tobacco.
And selling tobacco is what makes the industry its millions. So while it puts on a benign face in the West, it's a different story in developing countries, where 80% of the world's smokers live.
Citizens every year.
I've spent nearly 40 years investigating the tobacco industry and seen how little has changed in the developing world. The industry claims it markets responsibly, but the claim often seems as hollow today as it did way back then. In East Timor, one of the poorest countries in the world, we found cigarette companies selling their brands dirt cheap.
This package, it's $1. Young people are smoking more and more each year, especially boys.
And we investigate how, across the globe, the industry uses its legal muscle to crush any opposition that stands in its way.
They hope that use of the law can bully small countries out of taking action on smoking and introducing measures that those companies fear.
So has the industry really turned over a new leaf, or is it still intent on burning tobacco and seducing the young? It's like turning back the clock, smokers puffing away, clouds hanging in the air. But this is not the past, this is a London cafe today. And these are no ordinary cigarettes. They're electronic or e-cigarettes based on nicotine. Because they're tobacco-free, they can legally be used in pubs, offices, and most places where real cigarettes are banned. To the tobacco industry, these devices are revolutionary. They could save thousands of lives and even make smoking socially acceptable again.
If we're able to take consumers and give them the nicotine that they enjoy, the pleasure they derive from nicotine in lower harm, safer products, then that has to be the right thing to do.
I'm a non-smoker and needed a guide to lead me through the haze of this bewildering new world.
Oliver. Hi.
Peter.
Oliver Kershaw is the founder of an online forum dedicated to promoting the smoker's new accessory. He doesn't smoke regular cigarettes anymore. He gets his kick from inhaling nicotine vapor. That's why it's known as vaping.
I don't really know how to smoke, but I'd be interested just to try one.
Absolutely.
Just give me a lesson. Where's the nicotine in there?
The nicotine is contained within a small cartridge inside here. And as you puff on it, an automatic switch will feed through to a small heating coil, which will heat the solution that produces the vapor.
No, I'm not a smoker.
The range of devices is astonishing, from the classic cigarette to more exotic paraphernalia. They're all based on liquid nicotine that comes in every flavour under the sun, from tobacco to toffee, from cherry to chocolate.
What is the popularity of these devices?
It's a drop in the ocean compared to the overall tobacco sales. But the central thing is the explosion in interest right now.
My first reaction was how strange to go into a pub and see clouds of smoke once again. But not everyone hails the revolution.
We're in a pub.
Yep.
You've been vaping.
Yep.
I've had the odd vape. Where can we do this, besides pubs?
By law, we can do it wherever we like, but of course in private establishments like pubs, it's at the discretion of whoever runs the pub.
On what grounds?
Well, they've said that their staff are confused, they don't know whether people are smoking or not. As a society, I suppose, we have to adjust to a new form of behaviour that we're not quite au fait with yet.
It's estimated just over 2 million vapers currently use e-cigarettes in the UK, 3 times the number of 2 years ago.
Well, that was a really interesting experience, and I did learn a lot. What's astonishing is the vast variety, the mind-boggling range of nicotine delivery devices. But in the end, how successful these devices will be, and e-cigarettes will be, will depend on smokers themselves.
The first e-cigarettes were produced by small independents with no links to the cigarette industry. But very quickly, the big tobacco companies saw their potential.
E-cigarettes are one of the most exciting innovations in this industry for many, many years. And I think the current e-cigarettes do appeal to many cigarette smokers.
BAT was the first tobacco company to launch an e-cigarette in the UK. At its research labs in Southampton, it's committed to harm reduction and is spending £160 million every year on improving new, safer products.
E-cigarettes don't perform particularly well yet, but I'm convinced that with technology they will improve and provide an increasingly consumer acceptable alternative to the traditional cigarette.
British American Tobacco believes nicotine is no more harmful than a cup of coffee.
The safety of nicotine is very similar to caffeine. There are around 100 toxicants in cigarette smoke, and it's those toxicants that are the cause of the real and serious diseases associated with cigarette smoking.
But unlike caffeine, which is only mildly addictive, nicotine can be extremely addictive. Professor Sir Cyril Chandler headed a government inquiry into cigarette packaging in England and Wales. He's a leading paediatrician and has studied and experienced the effect of nicotine on smokers.
It is very addictive, and it's addictive both psychologically, but it's also addictive biologically, and we now understand far better than we did before the effect, the mechanisms on the brain receptors that lead to that level of addiction. I know personally it's very difficult to give up.
You were a smoker?
I was.
How long did you smoke for?
More than 30 years.
How did a doctor
Indeed.
and a paediatrician
Indeed.
become a lifelong smoker and smoke for 30 years?
Well, if I knew now, if I knew what I know now, I wouldn't have started.
For the tobacco industry, producing a safer way of delivering a nicotine hit could, with the right product, hit the jackpot.
A tremendous number of people will simply adapt to it because they can't go without their nicotine. So that combination, to be able to have this near monopoly on a delivery of an addictive product used by over 1 billion people, is extraordinary in terms of profitability.
There's no guarantee there's a king's ransom to be made, but the industry knows it ignores the vaping revolution at its cost. It's seen what's happened to other companies left high and dry by technological changes. Digital cameras wiped out most of Kodak's business almost overnight.
All of the tobacco companies talk in terms of Kodak moments, that the technology changes and either you change as a company to move with this new technology or you risk getting left behind.
So swift has been the rise of e-cigarettes that regulation has still to catch up. The result is a free-for-all, with advertisers having a field day. BAT was the first tobacco company to advertise its e-cigarette on British television. It's as glossy as any cigarette ad used to be, not surprising when the campaign cost several £1 million.
It's absolutely reminiscent of the heyday of tobacco advertising. It's about lifestyle, it's about being cool, it's about making a statement about yourself. It's the sports sponsorship, the product placement in music videos. This is the stuff of dreams for the tobacco companies. Back on television. We haven't had a tobacco advertisement, or a cigarette advertisement at least, in the UK since 1965. This is an exciting moment if you're a tobacco company. I think it's a more sombre moment if you're in public health.
It's not legal to advertise or use product placement for conventional cigarettes in the UK, and there are plans to extend the ban to most e-cigarettes. But at the moment, it's a free-for-all.
I mean, I'm personally worried about the advertising of them because it might cause confusion in young people's minds about the dangers of cigarette smoking.
I have absolutely no doubt that e-cigarettes are the most brilliant marketing device for tobacco that we've seen in a long, long time. I see e-cigarettes as, if you like, a weapon of mass distraction, a means for the tobacco companies of distracting us from what we actually need to do, and we know we should do, to reduce smoking.
The concern among many anti-tobacco campaigners is that e-cigarettes could once more make cigarettes socially acceptable. E-lights were launched in 2009. They may not be owned by a tobacco company, but they're being marketed just like cigarettes of old.
30 years ago, I filmed John Player Special Girls doing exactly the same kind of thing at an amusement park in Scarborough.
Do you smoke cigarettes, anybody? It's a free draw for cigarette smokers to win a Lotus.
Little appears to have changed, except, of course, the cigarettes. How many a day do you smoke?
About 20.
20 a day. And do you want to try and stop smoking?
I've got to stop now. I've just had a serious chest complaint, so I've got to stop now.
E-lights are at the top of their league and sponsor Worcester Warriors rugby team, who, unfortunately, are at the bottom of theirs. On match day, I talked to one of E-Light's founders, Adrian Everett. He's now a very rich man. He spent nearly £5 million on marketing in 2013 and plans to double that.
Just looking round at all the advertisements for E-lights, and it's going to be on television as well, it's like going back 50 years when you could advertise cigarettes on television.
When you're building a brand for smokers, you need to resonate with smokers.
But you're associating a cigarette, albeit an e-cigarette, with a healthy pastime. Aren't you normalising the habit of smoking?
There have been criticisms of electronic cigarette sponsorships in sports stadia. Because it's such a new market and a new product, one of the fastest ways to reach a larger smoking audience is through sports sponsorship.
But for the tobacco industry, it could be a win-win situation. Advertising its e-cigarettes may attract more vapers, but if vaping does normalise the smoking habit, then that's potentially more customers for their regular brands.
When you see advertisements for e-cigarettes, what hits you about them is that it normalises the habit of smoking.
I don't believe that our advertising or even our e-cigarettes will normalise smoking. I think the opposite is true, actually, in that offering cigarette smokers this safer alternative will be a good thing for public health. It's likely to lead to more people quitting cigarette smoking and migrating to safer alternatives like e-cigarettes.
E-cigarettes now threaten an unprecedented split in the anti-tobacco lobby, which for so long has been united against a common enemy. Many don't trust the industry's motives. They fear e-cigarettes could be a gateway for the young into nicotine addiction and smoking.
There's a danger that, particularly with the very evocative marketing of these things, they get children interested in the use of nicotine and thereby smoking as well as e-cigarettes, but the use of nicotine generally, which isn't desirable.
But other health campaigners welcome the potential of e-cigarettes to save lives by encouraging smokers to quit conventional cigarettes.
if they show signs through deeds, not just words, that they're moving into these products and they're trying to change their business into a nicotine business that is far, far less harmful to health, then I think that's something that should be cautiously welcomed and taken seriously. I mean, the problem is if you just shut them out of everything and say they're just unequivocally, unambiguously evil, they always have been and they always will be, there's nowhere for them to go.
One doctor in central England is so convinced of their benefit, he's even gone into the e-cigarette business himself and opened his own shop. It's right next door to his surgery, situated in one of the most deprived areas of Derbyshire, where adult smoking rates are almost twice the national average.
Smoke your cigarettes down to the bone.
Well, I think these are the greatest invention that we've seen in modern times, really. I spent 20 years trying to stop people smoking and trying to help them. And then all of a sudden, patients who I've prescribed to tablets, nicotine replacements, and gone back to smoking, have come along having stopped with electronic cigarettes.
But are you saying to your patients that these are safe? Not just safer, but safe?
I think they're safe.
It's surprising to hear a doctor saying any cigarette is safe. His shop is an Aladdin's cave of e-cigarette products and all that goes with them.
But you're not using it as a means to stopping smoking, then?
I haven't had a fag for a month since I've had it. I've never touched a fag since I've had it.
But will you reach the point where you actually stop vaporising? Or will you carry on?
I enjoy it.
But isn't the danger that if young people start using these things, we're breeding a whole new generation of nicotine addicts?
I guess that's always a risk, but I haven't seen any evidence of it so far. What I've seen is people stopping and using electronic cigarettes.
Recent research suggests that nearly all cigarette users are existing or ex-smokers. There's no evidence so far they're a gateway for young people to start smoking. But with tobacco claiming one victim every 5 minutes in the UK, will they save lives? No one is more aware of the risks associated with conventional cigarettes than Professor John Britton. He's campaigned against tobacco for years.
E-cigarettes and other nicotine delivery devices that are sort of in development are an immensely powerful potential tool for the good in public health, in my view.
The problem is, it will take many years before we know whether they are really safe or not.
We don't know that, but at the moment, the problem with the whole e-cigarette market is the complete lack of regulation, which has the strength on the one hand that it opens the market up to a lot of innovation and development, but on the other hand, it's very hard personally to recommend a product if I don't know what's in it. But what we do know about the way that electronic cigarettes work is that they cannot conceivably be as hazardous as tobacco cigarettes.
If e-cigarettes could come in and take half the cigarette market, or perhaps even more, then it would make huge inroads amounting to hundreds of millions of avoided premature deaths. And that would be one of the biggest public health interventions of all time.
Despite e-cigarettes' small market share, tobacco companies like BAT remain confident about the future of less harmful nicotine-based products. Some investment analysts say they will overtake conventional cigarettes in the next decade. But others in the anti-tobacco lobby believe this is all a smokescreen to hide the industry's real agenda.
They have a track record of not being trustworthy. They've twisted the evidence in the past, they've tried to consistently undermine policy, and most importantly, they continue to try and maximize profits. So they want to sell their products, cigarettes. And by investing in the e-cigarette market, I don't think we've got any evidence to suggest they're wanting to switch to that entirely. They're wanting people to continue to smoke.
BAT says it's now committed to reducing harm. But the anti-tobacco lobby finds it difficult to trust the industry that lied and dissembled for half a century.
This is the same language that we've heard from tobacco companies for several decades. First of all, despite the rhetoric, they're still promoting their lethal products as heavily as they can, and especially in developing countries.
With ever-increasing regulation and smoking declining in the West, the developing world offers the industry vast and hugely profitable new markets. 8 out of 10 of the world's 1 billion smokers live in low and middle-income countries, where restrictions are often limited or virtually non-existent. Here, e-cigarettes are nowhere to be seen. I flew to East Timor, the country with one of the highest smoking rates in the world. It's just a few hundred miles from the northern tip of Australia. In comparison with Australia, which has some of the strictest anti-smoking laws on the planet, East Timor has virtually none. I went to see how cigarette companies exploit a wide open market, where nearly half the population is under 15.
East Timor is one of the poorest countries in Southeast Asia, and it's a different world. Here, a packet of 20 costs less than £1. You can smoke anywhere you want to, and advertising is everywhere.
The notion of tobacco control has yet to hit East Timor. Here, the industry has free rein, with no restrictions on advertising, and the Marlboro cowboy still rides the range.
Young people are smoking more and more each year, especially young male people. It's a very serious problem.
61% of East Timor's men smoke every day. Cigarettes are everywhere. Legislation is nowhere.
This package, it's $1. $1
Just
cost.
$1 US.
$1 US. Marlboro is $1.50.
And health warnings are pretty useless too, as around half the adult population can't read.
I also noticed that a lot of the stalls that I walked past had empty packets. Why would they have empty packets?
They sell by individual cigarettes. One cigarette of this brand, it's 10 cents. If you buy 2, it's 20 cents. If you buy 4, it will be 25 cents.
And who buys single cigarettes?
Everybody.
The absence of legislation or restrictions give the industry carte blanche to seduce young smokers.
Last year, these posters appeared all over the capital. They're advertisements for a cigarette brand called the Vant E3 23, and they show a pretty cool-looking young guy dressed in black leather sitting across a pretty cool black motorbike. And the slogan is, "Proud of yourself." Presumably proud because you're a smoker, but even more so because you're smoking Vant E3. What's interesting is that none of these posters contained any health warning.
After protests from health campaigners, the posters were taken down and then put up again, this time with a small health warning. But the health lobby does have a friend in a high place, the Prime Minister's Australian wife, a committed anti-cancer campaigner.
Tobacco companies in Indonesia and elsewhere are targeting very much young people who are conscious of image, conscious of you know, the cool factor, if you like.
How old?
You know, 10, 11.
Part of the problem is that smoking is as much a part of East Timor's culture as cockfighting.
I notice a lot of people are smoking here.
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, put it this way, smoking is a part of like a breakfast in the morning, like I had bacon and egg in the morning. That's why I had a cigarette every day.
How many cigarettes a day do you smoke?
Me? Probably like 3, 4, about 60 cigarettes a day.
60?
Yeah.
60?
60, yeah. That means 3%.
Aren't you worried about your health and what it may do to you?
If you give up smoking, you're gonna die soon anyway. So why don't I start smoking?
Are you addicted?
I'm not. I just enjoy it.
Despite being an unrepentant smoker himself, Arthur is concerned about the young.
Have you noticed more and more young people beginning to smoke over the past few years?
Absolutely. Young boy with 10, 11 years old start smoking. Even in school, they're smoking.
And smoking is part of East Timor's revolutionary culture too. The guerrilla leader who helped lead it to independence was incarcerated here. Cigarettes kept him going when he was fighting in the bush. The former insurgent is now the Prime Minister, seeing off his wife and children on the morning school run.
Are you still smoking?
Unfortunately. I have to say unfortunately, because sometimes I would like to quit. I tried 3 times, I could not.
And the Prime Minister follows the tobacco industry's line on advertising, opposing any ban.
Looking around, there are advertisements for cigarettes everywhere, by the roadside, Marlboro posters. Do you have plans to ban advertising of cigarettes?
Just the law banning this, banning that, it will not be so effective. I would say it needs education only. It will take time, but I believe that more people are aware of the disease that it can cause, more they are able to stop by themselves.
It's exactly the same argument I remember tobacco companies using 40 years ago. What happens in East Timor's schools is scandalous.
And I've witnessed firsthand teachers who smoke while teaching. You know, they're there on the blackboard writing A, and then they have people repeat A, and while they're repeating A, they have a puff, and then B, B, C. Everybody's saying C together. And that's how they teach. The whole school system has absolutely no regulation on tobacco use in school.
East Timor's hospitals are not yet full of patients suffering from smoking-related diseases, as its young people, increasingly addicted to Western cigarettes, haven't been smoking long enough. Traditionally, tuberculosis is the biggest killer, a disease Dr. Dan Murphy has been treating for the past 20 years. But now he's concerned about a future epidemic.
How do you think young people regard smoking?
The young people are learning that what they're supposed to do to be Western and advanced is smoke cigarettes. And so young people, if they have access to enough money, they'll buy some. Now, we have to change the whole way of thinking and start worrying about tomorrow, the next day.
How do you see East Timor's smoking future?
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to go through a phase of learning the hard lesson that has been seen throughout poor countries.
And your Prime Minister is a smoker.
That's right. He should stop. I recommend that he stop.
You told him, have you?
Every chance I get.
Do you think the government is genuinely committed to tackling the smoking?
Of course not. Of course not. These are the major lobbyers in our country. These people are powerful. They find ways. They are spin doctors. They can make it seem like it's not what we are talking about. It's something that's a pleasure. It's something that adds to your life and puts meaning in your life. But you're up against a machine of propaganda, and it's a tough battle.
The propaganda being?
For cigarettes, for smoking, the images.
In most of the world, governments have increasingly limited tobacco advertising. In spite of this, the industry continues to find ingenious ways to seduce smokers. It has a long tradition of spending billions targeting new customers. But recently, the World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control has encouraged a host of new regulations in many countries.
The convention is a series of tough and wide-ranging objectives that most countries have signed up to, including the UK. But signing up isn't enough. Governments have to legislate if the recommendations are to mean anything, and the industry is always ready to exploit any loopholes.
Argentina has one of the highest smoking rates in the whole of South America. A third of men smoke, as do a quarter of all teenagers between 13 and 15. And 100 smokers a day die prematurely. It's a rich market. Philip Morris has around a 70% share and BAT around 20%. Argentina has paid lip service to the Framework Convention. Its government signed up a decade ago, but has never ratified it.
There are restrictions on smoking and restrictions on tobacco. You can't smoke in public places, although you can smoke in the street. And there are restrictions on advertising. The only place you're allowed to advertise cigarettes are at point of sale.
National law says advertisements should not be visible from outside the point of sale, but local law is less clear. Just walking down one of the city's main shopping streets, you can't miss them.
For tobacco industry, advertising at point of sale is crucial. In Argentina, they expanded the point of sale, taking advantage of a loophole in the legislation, selling cigarettes in many other places like restaurants, bars and discos, which allows them to put advertising also in these places, and the visibility of this advertising increased a lot in the last year.
The law also prohibits smoking in enclosed public places. During the day, the law is obeyed, but at night time, it's a different story.
What did you find when you carried out research into clubs and discotheques?
In the city of Buenos Aires, we evaluated 40 discos, and 95% violated the law.
I haven't been clubbing for years, but strictly in the interest of research, I thought I'd better hit the city's night spots and breathe in the atmosphere. In the clubs, you'd never guess there were restrictions on smoking and advertising.
There are a good many people smoking inside, and smoking in a public place like this in Argentina is illegal, but they don't care. As you can see, there are advertisements for Philip Morris in several places inside this club. In Argentina, they're only allowed to advertise at point of sale.
Because cigarettes can be bought behind the bar, Philip Morris maximises the opportunity to advertise around the club. They told us Argentinian law permits cigarette advertising where cigarettes are legally sold, including nightclubs and pool halls, which can be points of sale. And they said that local laws allow advertising inside kiosks to be visible from the street. In another club I went to, there was a blatant advertisement for BAT's Pall Mall. I went to a couple of clubs, and in one of the clubs there was a large advertisement for your brand Pall Mall in the middle of the club, in the middle of the dance floor. And yet advertising in Argentina is by and large banned. So what's that advertisement doing there?
I'm not clear on the absolute specifics of the Argentinian regulation. As you've shown me that picture, I will check out what the regulations are, and I will be discussing with our local company management. But let me say, BAT is absolutely committed to responsible marketing standards.
BAT's local management said the advertisement complied with the point-of-sale law. I also went to a pool hall. Philip Morris was radiating from the wall and branded on the pool tables. My night on the town showed just how blatantly cigarette companies can exploit the law to promote their brands before crowds of young people. And what about a bar with no smoking warnings on the wall?
Martin, you're smoking.
Exactly.
There's a sign on the wall that says smoking is prohibited, so why are you smoking when you shouldn't be?
Because this is a regular thing in every bar and every club. There is a sign that says that we are not allowed to smoke, but actually we can. Nobody tells you otherwise.
Do inspectors come round?
Usually they don't.
And when they do, when inspectors come round and see you smoking, what do they say?
I don't know. Never happened to me. I never see an inspector.
It's illegal to smoke, so why are you smoking here?
Because I like to smoke when I'm with friends, and it's a normal thing here.
Well, that was illuminating. In there are lots of young people smoking. They're all breaking the law. They know they're breaking the law, but they couldn't care less because the law simply isn't enforced.
And it's not just a question of the law. Cigarettes are incredibly cheap. A packet of 20 costs less than $2.
Why hasn't the government increased the price of cigarettes, as there's crystal clear evidence that consumption goes down as the price of cigarettes goes up?
The only reason is tobacco industry lobby. From 24 provinces we have, 7 are tobacco growers. And the lobby in the Congress is many times developed through these governors, with the argument that any increase in tobacco price or any other tobacco control policy will damage their regional economies, will damage their jobs.
It was the same argument that I'd heard from BAT in 1980 when I made a film about their operations in Brazil. Tobacco is also a crucial part of Brazil's economy.
The fact is that if the Third World were to discourage the growing of tobacco, the people who would suffer in the long term would not be the farmers, but the big tobacco companies.
Argentina is the second largest tobacco grower in South America. That's why the tobacco lobby is so powerful. In Buenos Aires, tobacco has the ear of government and has 1 million political and economic reasons for doing so. That's the number of people employed in the industry, in its factories and fields. Tobacco has little time for the Framework Convention.
Buenos dias, señor. Buenos. Peter Taylor, BBC. Thank you. Good to see you. Why hasn't Argentina ratified the World Health Organization's Framework Convention?
For the union, and in defense of our jobs, I have to say we are against that framework, because it would affect our source of employment.
Isn't the health of the citizens of Argentina more important than the commercial interests of the tobacco industry?
Obviously, I worry for all the Argentinians' health, but we're talking about a product that is always destined for adults. I believe that adults should decide for themselves which road they want to follow.
If the climate for tobacco is friendly in Argentina, the climate in neighbouring Uruguay is distinctly hostile. So hostile that Philip Morris is suing Uruguay. Its government claimed originally for an estimated $2 billion. But Philip Morris says that's wildly inflated, and the true figure is $25 million. The reason is because Uruguay has the most stringent anti-smoking legislation in South America and was the first country on the continent to ban smoking in enclosed public places. Unlike Argentina, the law is strictly enforced. No one smokes in the covered market in Montevideo, one of the capital's gastronomic must-visits. But when the government increased health warnings to cover 80% of the packet, Philip Morris took legal action, claiming the warnings infringed its intellectual property rights and commercial freedom.
Uruguay is a relatively small country, so they hope that use of the law can bully small countries out of taking action on smoking and introducing measures that those companies fear. They want to prevent the domino effect.
This is one of the old tobacco kiosks in central Montevideo, and here are all the cigarette packets, and here are all the 80% warnings on the front and back. And when you look at these, you can understand why Philip Morris take such strong objection to the 80% of the warnings and why they want to teach Uruguay a lesson.
The architect of Uruguay's anti-tobacco legislation was Professor Tabare Vasquez, who was president at the time. He's also an oncologist.
We have more than 1,000 deaths per year due to lung cancer caused by tobacco. For us, smoking is the worst pandemic that humankind has endured.
Why did you introduce warnings on packs that covered 80% of the pack?
We wanted to impact strongly on people's consciousness, to make them understand even more clearly the damage that tobacco causes.
The campaign featuring the new, larger health warnings was devised by one of Uruguay's leading ad agencies.
For women, there are some designs talking about looks and the loss of beauty. For men, the designs are linked to impotence.
Philip Morris's legal onslaught on Uruguay is also aimed at a much wider audience.
I think they use Uruguay as a guinea pig because it's a small country and took it to an international court to serve as a warning to other countries in the area that are starting to follow Uruguay's path, to stop them from doing it.
Do you think you can win that?
It's not easy.
We are confronting a giant, like the fight between David and Goliath. But David's already won once. Maybe there will be a second time.
Quizás haya una segunda vez.
Professor Vasquez is running for president again. He's probably the last person Philip Morris wants to see in the presidential palace. And Philip Morris has already voted with its feet.
In 2011, Philip Morris closed down its factory here in Montevideo. It used to employ 90 workers. Philip Morris had had enough. It up sticks and left.
And left Uruguay with an expensive legal action. Philip Morris told us that the notion of litigation serving as a deterrent to others is laughable, saying that since they lodged their claim, more than 30 countries have increased tobacco regulation. But the tobacco industry's legal offensive doesn't stop at Uruguay. Australia too is fending off a legal attack on the same intellectual property rights grounds after it introduced plain packaging.
They have squads of lawyers who can spend any amount of money they like, and they do it for two reasons. First, the faint hope that they might actually get a win, but second, it can be a distraction and a delay. You know, legal cases take years and years and years.
Once the legislation was passed, then we faced a full range of legal actions, both domestically and internationally, either to win the legal challenge or to scare us off, or I think in some instances to try to scare other countries off from following Australia down this path.
Ireland too has plans to introduce plain packaging and may be next in line for a visit from the industry's lawyers. The Health Minister has no illusions.
I can tell you I'm 100% convinced they're going to take legal action. I can tell you that I know already that many of the barristers around this town have been retained by the tobacco industry so that we won't be able to avail of their services. But we anticipated that, so we have retained the best of people way back before this fight began.
But on what grounds could the tobacco industry, cigarette companies, take legal action against your government?
They will argue that we're interfering with intellectual property rights. It would be an extraordinary society that would put the intellectual property rights of multinationals over the right to life of citizens and children particularly. This is a nation that stands on its own 2 feet and will protect our children.
And the threat of legal action is likely to cross the Irish Sea if the UK brings in plain packaging. The government says it's minded to legislate, but has started a further round of consultation to show everything has been done by the book to head off any potential legal challenge.
Plain packaging inherently involves the taking of what belongs to us, which is our intellectual property. Governments simply taking something which is not theirs and taking that property as if it were their own.
If the government does go ahead, will BAT be taking legal action?
If we think it contravenes international or UK trade legislation, then we reserve the right to take legal action if we think it's appropriate.
Intellectual property rights are high-sounding words to defend the right to market the most deadly consumer product on the planet. Critics say it's hypocritical for an industry that talks of corporate responsibility and professes to care about children to attack legislation designed to defend them.
You see like smoking packets and there's like these pictures on them about lungs and children not breathing the smoke.
That's why anti-smoking groups often talk to young children, a microcosm of the next generation the industry needs to recruit as smokers.
And if they smoke, it's really bad for them.
Making these programs, I've been struck by just how much the industry has changed in the West, not least by publicly accepting that smoking kills.
So this is a chart which lays out the 100 known toxicants in cigarette smoke. You're inhaling them into your lung, and that's why smoking presents such a risk to health.
But in the rest of the world, the industry continues to seduce hundreds of thousands of young people every year.
We have a duty of care to our young people and our children, and we should do everything we can to encourage them not to do something which they will regret later in life. I wish the tobacco industry would just accept it. They're decent people, so why don't they just do their very best to help us all reduce the risk of young people starting to smoke?
I've been struck by the tenacity of both sides fighting the war. The industry never gives ground unless forced to, and the health lobby never gives up.
The tobacco industry cannot be trusted, and I think we need to be very sceptical about what they do today and in the future, including with new developments.
The industry is hoping to turn the tide with e-cigarettes and harm reduction. but it knows that conventional cigarettes will probably continue to produce the lion's share of its profits for many years to come.
I am extremely hopeful and extremely excited about the next 100 years. I think that the future is about tobacco harm reduction, whilst conventional cigarettes will remain the mainstay of our business for a long time.
It's now almost 40 years since I began investigating smoking and the tobacco industry. Since then, around 100 million smokers have died prematurely from this fatal addiction. I remember summing up my thoughts all those years ago when the risks were just beginning to register with smokers and the public.
You make programs on smoking because you feel very strongly about the subject. All we can do as television journalists is to make the public aware of something. The next step is up to the smoker himself and to the government.
I never imagined back then that today, despite all that's known about smoking's dreadful toll of death and disease, the tobacco industry would be going from strength to strength, with billion-dollar profits and 1 billion customers worldwide. And it seems there's no immediate likelihood of that changing. That's the burning paradox of the seduction of smoking.